Okay, so our next guest is Mr. Claude Johnson. And he is an author, and he's a sports historian. He has a new book that just came out a couple of weeks ago. And when I heard about this book, Mary said, give the book to Queen.
Yeah.
So we'll do that.
That's so sweet of you, Mary.
That is sweet, because Mary's won about 10 or 15 books. So I do want to say, welcome, Mr. Johnson. When I heard about your book and you being on the show, guess what? I got my own copy.
Hey, let's go. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
So this book is called The Black Fives, the epic story of basketball's forgotten era. And I'm thinking this is kind of sort of similar to the Negro Leagues in baseball, although it looks like it was even earlier than that in terms of the time period.
Well, you know what? It was definitely in parallel. There's some major differences, but what I first wanted to say was just thank you very much for having me on. It's an honor, and I appreciate being in the same group with your distinguished guest authors as well. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's an honor for us to have you on the show, and we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us tonight.
And I appreciate the T-shirt also as well. I've been wearing it.
T-shirt.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about why you, and this is a very hefty book. I want to say it's 400 or 500 pages. Well, it's a lot of footnotes. So it's about 400 of content. And then, the print is fairly small. So, I mean, as books go, because I read a lot of books. And so there's lots of information in here. That's what that means.
Yeah, it's dense. It weighs 28 ounces. And so that's heavier than a regulation basketball. But part of it is because it has 85 photos that are, glossy color photos in there. So there's a couple of different inserts, and those add to the weight. But also it's a lot of information, and honestly, it's really just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much history there. My editor kept telling me, we got to cut it down. We got to cut it down. And there are a lot of footnotes as well, because, it's a narrative nonfiction, but that's because I was just trying to give humanity to these, humanize these pioneers.
Mm-hmm.
Usually when we look at sports history, we look at, these are the stats, and they won this many games, and these are the years when they had championships, and this is how they compare to Stephen Curry or whatever. But you never really get to know, well, who are these people? Who was their mama? Who was their daddy? Where'd they come from? What decisions were they making? What was happening during their time, in their neighborhood, or even, in their city or where they were from. So the way I start the book actually is with this pioneer named Will Anthony Madden. And I start with him because I start with a description of his unmarked grave and what that's like, and how he got there, how a person with an unmarked grave gets into an unmarked grave. And the reason I start there is because he was born in the 1880s, and he rose from poverty in the Little Africa section of Old Greenwich Village in Manhattan. That's where most Blacks in New York City used to live. Mm-hmm. And he rose from poverty to become the king of Black basketball. And then during the 1910s, and then he lost it all. And when he died in the 1970s, he had no next of kin and no heirs and nobody to claim his body. So he was buried in an unmarked grave. And so at the end, just before the end of the book, I go into the redemption of how he, it's like a redemption, like a vindication of him. And we just ordered a proper tombstone for Mr. Madden with a proper epitaph, because he's really a candidate, should be recognized by the Basketball Hall of Fame for what he did. But what I also do is I say, all this history was also buried in an unmarked grave. Mm. And now this book hopefully unburies some of that history. And so the book itself is like the proper tombstone in a way, even though it's just a small part of all the things that happened. So somebody said,
no, I was just saying so many questions. I mean, I wanted to ask you how you came to be interested in this story. I wanted to know how you were able to find this unmarked grave, and what are we doing now to lobby to get him into the Basketball Hall of Fame?
yeah, so this all started because I was working at the NBA, and it was in 1996, and they came out with a book called the NBA Encyclopedia of Basketball, and it was an 800-page book, but only 3 pages were devoted to earlier Black teams. But I knew there were more because Arthur Ashe wrote this book called A Hard Road to Glory, which was about the journey of the African-American athlete, and he mentioned some team names in there, and I was like, wait, how come we don't know about these team names, and how come nobody else knows? The Hall of Fame didn't know, the Library of Congress didn't know. So I started on this journey of just understanding, how do people even do research? You have to go to a library. So I was going into the Schomburg, in Harlem, in the basement with the microfilm and learning how to roll through it. This was before digitized,
Right.
newspapers. And I just kept going and kept going. And eventually this started like 20 years ago. Sometimes I had to put it on the shelf because I have three sons, and so picked it back up again when I got a book deal, and that made it more serious, and so now I was like finishing this up, and the reason why I'm doing this at all is because I have kind of a compassion for giving voice to the voiceless. I feel empathy for that, and it reminded me of my grandparents, who moved from Louisiana to Chicago, and they left behind land, and they were sharecroppers, and we used to go visit them when I was a kid, and I just got this feeling of like nobody's telling their story, and so that's kind of how I got to this.
Wow. Well, you spent a lot of time on the research, and it shows just in the content of the book, and just
Thank you.
the heft of it all. And I wondered, with the Basketball Hall of Fame, how far back does the Basketball Hall of Fame go? Like, what year does it start?
Well, they were organized in the early 60s or maybe the late 50s, but they'll enshrine anyone that goes back to the beginning of Black basketball. For example, they did enshrine a man named Edwin Bancroft Henderson, who's known as the grandfather of Black basketball. And so I tell his story. The reason why is because he's credited with introducing basketball on a wide-scale organized basis to Black people for the first time. So, and he was in DC. So the book focuses on DC, Pittsburgh, Chicago, and New York City, which includes Brooklyn and Harlem and Manhattan, and how really the genesis of how African-American basketball emerged in those Black communities. Not just that suddenly there were these teams, but exactly how did they come about? What were the causes and the circumstances around society and culture and the country and everything that was happening? And so that's why I focus on these pioneers who were in those different cities by talking about like who actually were they, and so that hopefully by the end of the book you know how they think a little bit.
Right.
Now the Black Fives, what does that mean? What are the five what teams, people?
It was actually 5 players on a team. So
okay, right,
yeah.
Okay.
So they used to call them Negro quintets and colored fives and everything. So I was like, okay, how about Black Fives?
The Negro quintet. I tell you what, we've been called a lot of different things over the years.
Right.
I just, it's amazing. Now, was this in the South or just in those cities where you that you mentioned, or that's just where your research led you?
Well, it started in the Northeast and in those 4 cities primarily, but there were other cities too where the game spread to Cleveland and Detroit and Akron and Baltimore, Harrisburg, Philly, and then eventually out west, right? So, Milwaukee and California and also into the South, Atlanta and so on. But it really started, and the best teams for a while were from the Northeast and the Midwest. And that's just because, there was a lot more freedom to travel around, even though there was still Jim Crow, you had more, these African-American team owners were able to go out and play against white teams in the Midwest and wherever while they were traveling. It was a lucrative business model, but you couldn't really do that so much in the South. In the South, they had to travel down there and play against HBCU teams, or they literally brought their own white team, opponent sometimes in the fringe, the fringe states like Kentucky.
Wow.
Yeah.
Bringing their own. Okay.
It sounds crazy, but when you think about it, right? So during the Great Depression, during the middle of Jim Crow, there's an all-black team from Harlem traveling to an all-white state like Wisconsin, to an all-white town like Oshkosh, playing an all-white all-star team, beating that team, leaving safely, getting invited back again and again and again, because it's a business model for everyone, right? Because they're splitting the gate receipts, and they are bringing in, patrons from miles around that spend money in the hotels and the bars and the saloons and the restaurants and the merchants, and probably there's gambling on the side. And, then so it was a big deal when an African-American team came to town.
Wow. Yeah. This whole thing, you don't really hear about this. You hear a lot about the Negro League baseball teams, and we have for years. Then the Harlem Globetrotters is sort of like the team that's been around a long time that a lot of people hear about, but you really don't hear about these, the Black Fives.
Yeah.
You know why that is?
Well, part of it is,
they get lost.
you know what, the part of it is because they were thriving before the NBA. And when the NBA was formed in 1949, by the merger of those two leagues, the Basketball Association of America and the National Basketball League, there was really no reason for them to look back. And then they only signed really two players that had ever played in that environment. They signed 3 black players, but really only 2 of them played with some of these barnstorming teams. And then also right at that exact same time, the Globetrotters went in a different direction, more towards entertainment and comedy and touring into Europe and Asia, and they left the scene. And then also HBCUs started attracting a lot of the Black basketball talent because they were starting to develop their own conferences by then. And so there was really no reason to look back. And because of that, it just kind of got swept under the rug until some Black journalists, and especially a man named Howie Evans, who worked for the Amsterdam News in the 1960s, started to uncover a little bit of this history and began to advocate for the enshrinement of some of the best players in the Hall of Fame. This is back in the 1960s. Okay. And so they slowly, due to his effort, started to become inducted, and there's still more to go even now.
Wow. So now I know the book was just recently released, what, about a month ago? Not even a month.
May 24th. Yeah.
So what are your goals with this book? What do you want to see happen with this story?
Well, I want people to, first of all, read this. It's a human interest story. It's uncovering a lost history, and it should be inspirational, and it should also be educational about our lost history, because it's not just basketball. There's a lot of other history that's packed in there. I describe it like we're on a basketball train, but if you look out the window at the scenery, that's Black history going by. So I go down some of those side streets, to talk about some of the context of why people. So for example, like, we can't talk about basketball in New York City unless we talk about that it came out of because it was overcrowded. Well, then you have to say, well, why was it overcrowded? Because there were people leaving the South and, the Great Migration. Then you have to say, okay, well, why was that, right? So you got to get into it. You get into it. So, that's what I want people to get out of it. get the feeling that we were part of this game from the very beginning. And we didn't just somehow get inserted, in 1950 when the NBA signed Black players.
Right.
It's our game. We're responsible for the, for the caretaking of the game as well as anybody else. So that's what I want people to get out of it, and just keep the conversation going and start new conversations and have people just see themselves in some part of this book.
Right. I mean, when you tell this story, I just picture what happened with the Negro League, and how these players wanted to go play in the white league because they thought that this is where they were going to become stars and they would be able to play with the big leagues, and the Negro League just started to kind of fade away. And I'm that's what I'm kind of picturing when you tell this story of what happened with basically the Negro NBA.
Well, yeah, I mean, these pioneers paved the way for the NBA. They were making the game popular in places like Montana and Wisconsin, and way out, outside of the cities, so that by the time you have the Milwaukee Bucks or whoever it is showing up, that like the fact that it is even popular at all is attributed to these the large part to these African American pioneers. And yes, it faded away after the racial integration of the NBA, because there was no more reason to have these teams come out, because now you already had, just as I said, the more of a emergence of HBCUs and where talent could go. But again, it's just partly because the history just didn't want to tell that story. It was no reason to tell the story. And the business model was no longer compelling at that point. So I it's an interesting history. It's lost, but now it's found again.
Amen. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like a lot of people are interested in reading this story, just hearing what you had to say.
Oh, that's really beautiful. I mean, so I can tell you a couple of things. Like, there's so many little what do you call them, Easter eggs, and like things in the book that you're going to be like, whoa, wait, what? Like, right on the cover, the youngster holding that basketball on the cover is, as a kid, he was the mascot, but his name was Ralph Cooper. Ralph Cooper ended up growing up to become the originator of Amateur Night at the Apollo in Harlem. And he was the MC, and he introduced like all these major acts as amateurs, including Billie Holiday and Sarah Vaughan, and even like little 9-year-old Michael Jackson. So he learned some of that showbiz from the man who is in the collar on that same image, same cover image, collar with the carnation. That's Will Anthony Madden, who I mentioned at the beginning.
Okay. See, I just happened to have the book.
That's right. And he was a showman. He was like a showman. He was like, the show must go on. And so there are these factoids in there, like the marriage of music and basketball was an African-American innovation that took place, in the 1910s. So all these early ads in newspapers for basketball games, Black basketball games, it always said basketball and dance, because you had an orchestra that would play before the game, during halftime, and after the game, like a real orchestra, not just like a school marching band like you see at a college, but
or like a Duke Ellington type.
Yeah, like Fletcher Henderson. And
nice. I would love to see that.
Right, like you would actually get dressed up in your best Sunday attire to go to a basketball game, and because you knew that afterwards it was a social event, and somebody that was from North Carolina could meet somebody else from North Carolina. You didn't have social networking or even telephones back then.
Right. So here's some. I'm just opening the book on the inside. Some of the photographs that are in the book that are historic, and youth with the basketball circa 1908. So this is over 100 years ago. Now, it's pictures in here of some ladies. So are they basketball players as well?
Of course, yeah. So I do go into quite a bit about early African-American women's teams and how they evolved. Some of the earliest ones were they just had simple names like the New York Girls and the New Jersey Girls. But later they, started getting sponsorships. Like the Philadelphia Tribune is one of the oldest African-American papers in the country, and they sponsored a team, and they were called the Tribune Girls, or the Philadelphia Tribunes. And they won 11 straight Black national championships in 1930 into the 1940s. And so one of their star players, Ora Washington, is enshrined in the Basketball Hall of Fame. And part of that is because, I run this nonprofit called the Black Fives Foundation. And our mission is to research, preserve, showcase, teach, and honor this history. And one of the things we do is advocate for the proper recognition of these pioneers, including the women. And so I'm really proud that we've been able to be successful with our advocacy. We're not, not in our control, but we definitely push and try to make sure people know, and that the Hall of Fame knows about these individuals.
Now here's the information on your I'm sorry, but how do you
That's
find
okay.
information on your foundation? Because I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of people who want to connect with you.
Oh, you could just go to blackfives.org, just BLACKFIVES. Thank you for asking. And we're on social that way too, on Instagram, it's just Black Fives. Twitter, it's Black Fives.
Okay.
And and so thank you. I mean, we're trying to do some things. We have a lot of initiatives. We have an online museum because we've been collecting artifacts from this period. We think we have the largest collection in the world of artifacts from early African-American basketballs. We have an online museum that's sponsored by Puma, and we have a partnership with Puma. So if you go to that website, you probably see some gear, some gear that's educational because it's footwear and it's other things, and it's got information on it, and it's exciting, and we're proud of that, but also it's helping us to fulfill our mission as well.
Now here's an example of, and I don't know if people will be able to see it, but it says Pittsburgh versus New York. It's a Christmas game, Christmas night, December 25th, 1912, and it says basketball games and dance.
Exactly.
So this is like an ad that let me see. I don't know if people can see it right there.
Yes.
Ad for basketball games and a dance.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. It was at the Alpha Physical Culture Club.
Yes. Yeah, that was the first African-American athletic club in the country.
It was December 25th, 1912, and admission was 50 cents.
Right.
And a box, you could get a box like with, I guess, multiple people for $3.
Yes. Yeah.
How did it take you to put all of this together? Because I'm seeing your historic photos. I know, and it's a huge book.
It is.
And it's not just written as a research paper, so to speak. It's written as narrative fiction, or excuse me, narrative nonfiction. So you actually took the time to tell this in a story form. So I'm sure that this had to take a while to put all of this together.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, I started it more than 20 years ago, and then I had to put it on the shelf a couple of times, because I have three sons. They're student athletes, and they're now 22, 21, and 17, and so there's still a handful. But about 5 years ago, I got called from a person that wanted to represent me as an agent, and then we put together a proposal and looked around, and Abrams was the one that came through. They actually outbid HarperCollins, and which was like, okay, that's really cool. I was like, all right, that's awesome. Abrams is a great publisher, and they have great expertise and reach, and so nobody's perfect, right? No author or agent or publisher is perfect, but it did take a long time. But I just decided that I wanted to tell the full story. Somebody told me, I sent this book to a friend of mine at Morehouse, who's a professor there, and he said, when I got this book, I thought I was getting a Bible. And in a way, like somebody else said, it's like the book of Genesis for Black basketball, because I really just go to the roots of it. I try to go to, like, not just the superficial, but the people. including the flaws of some of those individuals, because we can learn from that, you know, and that's why at the end it's really a story of redemption of this individual. And I hope people, you know, can cheer for him. I won't give away the ending. There's actually an ending.
Oh, okay.
You know, so it's you know, you got to keep at it if you start to read it. It's also in audio form on Audible, narrated by the author, yours truly. So
Okay.
I hope the narrator knows what he's talking about.
Well, one thing's for sure, this is information that is not available in one place anywhere else. One, because you took 20 years writing it. And most people wouldn't give something 20 years unless they really, really were committed to it. You know, they really believed in what they were doing. So we applaud you for doing this. And I have one final question because we're 1 minute left. I like the cover and the fact that you have that pop of color right here with the basketball. It's black and white, and then you decided to do the basketball. Whoever did the cover decided to do the basketball in the traditional basketball color.
Well, Abrams is an award-winning, you know, they have award-winning designers and award-winning covers actually, and all of their covers just stand out and they're really remarkable. And so I'm really pleased with that design as well. And I just want to say, you know, sometimes it takes 20 years to find your own voice, right? Including just with the writing aspect of it. And sometimes, you know, people are blessed with that right away, but for me, it's taken a while. And so I'm glad, you know, we're here. And again, I appreciate being on your show, on your program.
Well, you're welcome. And people who watch the show know I love history. So when there's a history related book or guest, normally I get the book either before or shortly thereafter because I just love history. So, and then I end up giving it to other people that I know as gifts. So thank you so much for being a guest, and thank you for all the research you did and the hard work, and for preserving this wonderful knowledge for the future, for people now and in the future.
You're welcome. And if anybody wants to get info on the book, just go to thatnewbook.com. Literally, thatnewbook.com.
Thatnewbook.com. We put that in the chat.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being a guest, and continued success with the book and your work.
Thank you. And same to you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay. You're welcome.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.